The living room clock showed 8 in the morning, yet the apartment remained drowned in silence. For the first time in 10 years, Karen had no pills to arrange, no medical appointments to schedule, no special meals to prepare. Her mother, to whom she had dedicated the last decade of her life, had passed away only weeks earlier. The emptiness she left behind was immense, larger than the walls of the small apartment in Chicago. For 10 years, Karen had been more than a daughter. She had been a caregiver, an improvised nurse, a constant companion. Her entire world revolved around her mother's needs. Each year, she drifted further from her friends, her colleagues, even from herself. Her job at the company was left behind when caregiving became her full priority. Now, without that routine, she no longer knew who she was. The city, once loud and alive, now sounded like a distant echo. The streets of Chicago bustled with movement, but Karen walked among them like a shadow. She saw couples, families, co-workers rushing to work. She felt invisible, as if out of rhythm with the world. The title of daughter caregiver had defined her for so long that, without it, she seemed to have no role at all. The silence of her home became unbearable. Every corner carried memories: the armchair where her mother spent afternoons, the kitchen table where they shared small conversations. Even on the hardest days, Karen's fingers lingered over objects that no longer had used, her chest tightening. The past seemed to breathe in the rooms, but her own life felt forbidden from moving forward. The few messages from friends on her phone seemed distant and formal. After so many years apart, Karen no longer knew how to reconnect. What could she say? How could she explain 10 years of absence? Fear of not being understood kept her silent, pushing her deeper into isolation. More than alone, she felt misplaced, as if she had lost the key to re-enter the world. Unsettling thoughts haunted her. Had she wasted her life? By giving herself entirely to the role of caregiver, had she forgotten to live? That mix of guilt and emptiness pressed heavily on her shoulders, suffocating any attempt to imagine a future. She knew she had to rebuild herself, but she had no idea where to begin. As she looked out the window, at the city lights turning on, Karen wondered if there was still a place for her in this world. She felt like a stranger in her own life. Something within her whispered of change, yet fear kept her frozen. She did not know it yet, but the silence that now suffocated her would also become the starting point of her unexpected rebirth. Chicago pulsed outside her window, but Karen felt disconnected from it. The buses roared, people hurried along sidewalks, and the hum of the city carried on without her. She tried to blend into the crowd, but it only reminded her of her absence from that rhythm. She was no longer an employee rushing to meetings, no longer a woman with weekend plans. She was simply a woman adrift. Each familiar street corner triggered a memory. She remembered hurrying from the train to the office, coffee in hand, her head full of tasks. That version of herself seemed like a ghost now. Karen realized that while she had given everything to her mother, life outside had not waited. It had moved on, and she had no idea how to step back into it. Her old workplace stood only blocks away, yet it felt like a foreign country. She paused across the street one morning, staring at the building. Inside, people hurried between floors, carrying laptops and papers, chasing deadlines. Karen tightened her coat, realizing she no longer belonged to that world. The distance was not just professional, it was personal. A chasm of 10 years. When she tried to imagine rejoining society, panic crept in. Could she even hold a conversation beyond caregiving and illness? Could she laugh about ordinary things, make small talk, dream again? The questions pressed on her, heavier with each passing day. Karen's life had shrunk to a single identity, and now, stripped of it, she was left with nothing. Sometimes she sat in a cafe, pretending to be a passerby, sipping slowly, listening to strangers. Their conversations sounded foreign about vacations, promotions, relationships. She felt like an outsider observing a language she once knew but had forgotten. The city was alive, but Karen felt deadened, a spectator instead of a participant. Her loneliness was not just the absence of people, but the absence of purpose. She longed for something to fill the endless hours, something to remind her she was alive. Yet she felt paralyzed, unsure how to take even the smallest step forward. Days slipped into weeks, and Karen remained suspended in place, her heart aching with a mix of fear and yearning. One night, as the cold Chicago wind rattled her windows, she admitted a truth to herself. She could not continue like this. Something had to change. She needed more than survival. She needed meaning. The realization was both terrifying and hopeful. It was the first flicker of light in the long, heavy darkness. It happened unexpectedly, as Karen was sorting through old boxes stacked in her closet. She was searching for nothing in particular, only trying to occupy her restless hands. Among yellowed papers and worn notebooks, she found a folder with a familiar logo from her old company. Inside were photos and documents from a volunteer project she had once been part of. Her breath caught as she flipped through the photographs. There were smiling teenagers in a classroom, eager faces full of possibility. And there she was, younger but not by much, standing beside them with a look of pride. Karen remembered the program vividly. Employees volunteered as educators for underprivileged youth, preparing them for jobs and futures they once thought unreachable. A wave of warmth rushed through her chest. She had joined the project thinking she would be the one giving, the one teaching, but she remembered now how it had been the opposite. Those young people had filled her with courage and resilience. Their determination had reminded her of her own. She had left every session feeling lighter, stronger, more alive. For the first time in weeks, Karen smiled. The memory was sharp, vibrant, cutting through the haze of grief. She closed her eyes and could almost hear the laughter of the students, the energy of the classroom. It had been one of the last times she felt truly connected to the world. Before her mother's illness consumed her life, her fingers trembled as she held onto the folder. Could that part of her life still exist? Was the project still running? A tiny spark ignited inside her chest, fragile but real. It was the idea that perhaps the past wasn't gone, it was waiting, like an old door she had only to knock on. That night, she placed the folder on her nightstand instead of back in the box. She couldn't ignore it. Something about rediscovering that memory felt like a lifeline. Karen realized she had found not just nostalgia but a clue, a sign pointing her toward what might come next. As she drifted to sleep, the images of those young faces filled her dreams. She awoke with a pulse of anticipation, the first in a long time. The silence of her apartment remained, but now it carried a different weight. It no longer felt like a tumult, felt like a pause before something new. The next morning, Karen opened her laptop with trembling hands. She typed the name of the volunteer program into the search bar, half afraid it no longer existed. To her relief, a website appeared. The program had grown, still preparing young people for the future, still calling on volunteers to serve. Her chest tightened with both fear and excitement. Scrolling through the site, she saw photos of new groups of students and educators. The smiles were the same, the energy alive. Karen lingered on the How to Volunteer button. It seemed so simple, just click, sign up, and re-enter that world. But to her, it felt like leaping across a canyon. She hadn't been part of anything for a decade. Could she really belong again? Her mouse hovered over the button, then retreated. She closed the laptop, her heart pounding. Doubts rushed in. What if she had nothing to offer? What if she was too old, too broken, too out of touch? Yet the memory of those young faces pulled her back. She reopened the laptop, staring at the page, her breath shallow. Finally, she clicked. A form appeared, asking for her name, her background, her availability. Her fingers shook as she typed, each word feeling like a declaration. I am here. I want to return. When she pressed submit, tears welled in her eyes. It was only a form, but to her, it was a step back into life. The following days were filled with nervous anticipation. She checked her email constantly, waiting for a reply. At night, she imagined walking into a classroom again, hearing voices, feeling the energy of possibility. Fear mingled with hope, but for the first time in years, Karen felt the thrill of expectation. When the email finally arrived, she read it over and over. She was invited to attend an orientation session for new and returning volunteers. Karen's chest ached with relief. She whispered aloud, as if speaking to her mother's memory, "I'm trying, Mom. I'm really trying." The silence of her apartment was still there, but something had shifted. The weight of loss remained, but now it shared space with something else. Karen realized she had taken her first real step forward. The journey ahead was uncertain, but at least it had begun. The orientation was held in a modest community center downtown. Karen arrived early, her palms damp with nerves. The building smelled faintly of coffee and freshly cleaned floors, a simple but welcoming scent. She stood outside for a moment, steadying her breath before pushing open the door. Inside, she saw a small group of people gathering, some young, some older. Their faces carried warmth, a shared curiosity, a quiet eagerness. Karen found a seat near the back, unsure if she belonged. Yet as she listened to the chatter around her, she recognized a familiar rhythm, the sound of people willing to give a piece of themselves for others. When the coordinator began speaking, describing the mission of the program, Karen felt a rush of recognition. It was the same spirit she had felt years ago. "You may think you're here to help young people," the coordinator said, smiling, "but be prepared, they will change you even more." The words struck her deeply. She had lived that truth before. As the session continued, Karen introduced herself to the volunteer beside her, a man in his 40s named Daniel. To her surprise, the conversation flowed easily. He spoke about wanting to give back, and she nodded, realizing she understood. For the first time in years, Karen was speaking about something beyond grief. She felt almost like herself again. Yet insecurity lingered. When others shared their recent experiences, Karen felt the gap of her 10-year absence. She shifted uncomfortably, afraid they would see her as out of place. Still, when she spoke about her past with the program, eyes turned toward her with respect. She wasn't invisible here. She mattered. By the end of the orientation, Karen's fear had softened into cautious hope. She walked out into the chilly Chicago evening with a small smile tugging at her lips. She had taken not only a step but a leap. She was no longer standing still in her grief. She was moving. As she walked home, the city lights felt different, warmer somehow. Chicago was still bustling, but she no longer felt completely apart from it. She had a destination now, a thread tying her back to the world. Karen realized the journey had truly begun, and deep inside, she felt a flicker of belonging. The classroom was alive with nervous energy, the sound of chairs scraping the floor and whispered conversations bouncing off the walls. 20 young faces, between 17 and 18, filled the seats with a mix of boredom, curiosity, and guarded hope. Karen stood at the front, her palms damp against the marker she held. It had been years since she addressed a group like this, yet something inside her stirred awake. She greeted them, her voice steady despite the tightness in her chest. Some students returned a polite hello, while others barely lifted their eyes. She asked them to write one dream on a sticky note, something they wanted for their future. Pens tapped against desks, some quick and confident, others hesitant. A few didn't write at all, their silence saying more than words. As she collected the notes, she read them aloud. Nurse, mechanic, teacher, engineer. Each word, fragile as it was, carried the weight of a dream fighting to survive. Karen repeated them slowly, giving each one importance, refusing to let them sound small. The room softened, curiosity flickering across faces. Even silence felt different, less resistant, more contemplative. In one corner, a boy sat with arms folded, his note blank. His expression carried defiance, a silent challenge to authority. Karen noticed him but chose not to push on this first day. Trust was fragile, and she understood that sometimes resistance was just fear wearing armor. She made a quiet promise to herself not to give up on him. Before the bell rang, Karen formed the students into a circle. "What surprised you about yourself today?" she asked. Voices rose timidly at first, then stronger. "I spoke up, I listened, I realized I could do this." Each admission echoed like a small victory in the room. Karen's chest swelled with quiet pride as she listened. When class ended, one student lingered by the door. A girl with watchful eyes handed Karen her blank sticky note. "Can I try again tomorrow?" she whispered, her voice trembling between fear and hope. Karen smiled softly, slipping the note into her pocket as if it were a treasure. "Tomorrow," she said gently, "we'll write it together." As the room emptied, Karen sat for a moment, staring at the quiet desks. For the first time in years, she felt the pulse of belonging. She hadn't saved anyone today, but she had sparked something, a flame barely visible, yet alive. And with that flame, Karen realized she had begun to feel alive too. The next morning, Karen arrived early, opening the blinds to let the sun flood the room. Dust swirled in the golden light, transforming the classroom into something almost sacred. The girl from yesterday, still cautious but present, slipped quietly into her seat by the window. Karen greeted her with a warm smile. No pressure, just presence. It was the beginning of trust. She began the session with a simple prompt: write about a small problem you solved in your life. Pens tapped, papers rustled, and soon the room filled with scribbles of stories. Some students bent eagerly over their work, others hesitated, eyes darting toward the clock. The girl by the window hesitated longest, her pencil hovering uncertainly before finally touching paper. One by one, students shared their stories aloud. A lost bus pass recovered with determination. A younger sibling comforted during a storm. A broken chair fixed with tape and creativity. Karen applauded each story as if it were a monumental achievement. because for these students, each act was proof of resilience. Pride began to flicker in their voices. When it was her turn, the girl's paper shook in her hands. Her voice cracked at first, but then steadied as she read, "I helped my neighbor fill out a form. I didn't know how, but we learned together." The word together struck Karen like a bell, vibrating with meaning. It was small, but it was powerful. The room erupted in gentle applause. The girl's cheeks flushed with a mix of fear and pride, her eyes glowing with something new, belief in herself. Karen felt her heart twist, remembering her own younger self, quiet, overlooked, desperate for permission to matter. She saw herself reflected in that fragile moment of courage. After class, the girl introduced herself as Maya. Her voice was timid, but her words carried strength. "Your voice matters," Karen told her softly, and she saw the truth register in Maya's eyes. A fragile bridge stretched between them, one Karen knew she would fight to protect. Walking home through the bustling city, Karen noticed the difference. The same cold streets, the same hurried people, yet something inside her had thawed. Teaching wasn't just about giving knowledge, it was about remembering who she was. For the first time in years, Karen felt her spirit awaken, one careful step at a time. Karen designed the next session around building confidence. They practiced greetings, handshakes, and short introductions, simple tools that carried enormous weight in the world beyond these walls. The students laughed awkwardly at first, fumbling through words and gestures, but slowly, practice gave way to rhythm, and rhythm grew into something that looked like confidence. She walked among them, encouraging small victories. "That handshake is stronger," she told one boy. "Your smile makes a difference," she told another. Every correction was framed as growth, not failure. Karen knew too well how fragile hope could be. She treated every spark of progress as sacred. At one point, she introduced a breathing exercise. "In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, she instructed. At first, giggles erupted, but then the room settled into silence. The students closing their eyes, inhaling and exhaling together. Karen joined them, feeling her own body relax in rhythm with theirs. The quiet was powerful, filled with presence. Maya volunteered to demonstrate her introduction. Her voice trembled at first, but she steadied herself, finishing with a firm handshake and a smile that lit her face. The applause that followed wasn't forced, it was genuine. Karen watched her beam with pride, a small transformation unfolding before her eyes. But in the back, the boy with folded arms muttered a sarcastic remark, drawing laughter from a few others. Karen didn't scold him. She simply acknowledged his presence with a calm nod. She knew defiance was its own kind of fear, and that patience often built stronger bridges than confrontation. That as the class ended, Karen lingered alone in the empty room. The desks still carried the warmth of the students' energy, and she let herself feel grateful. It wasn't dramatic progress, but it was real, like steady rain nourishing seeds beneath the soil. She whispered softly to herself, "This is enough. This is how it begins." When she walked home, the city no longer felt like a backdrop to her grief. It felt like a place where something was quietly growing, and Karen realized she wasn't just teaching them resilience, they were teaching it back to her. The storm broke on the 4th day. As Karen began the session, the boy in the back slammed his chair against the wall and muttered loudly, "This is pointless. None of this changes anything." The room went silent, every pair of eyes darting toward him. Karen felt her heartbeat quicken, but she forced herself to breathe, to stand steady. She approached him slowly, her voice calm but firm. "What's your name?" she asked. His jaw tightened, eyes flashing with defiance. "Jocks," he said sharply, as if daring her to challenge him. Karen nodded, refusing to be baited. "Jocks, doubt belongs here," she said softly. "We can work with doubts, together." Her words hung in the air. Some students shifted in their seats, unsure how to react. Jocks scoffed, but his eyes flickered, the word together sinking deeper than he wanted to admit. Karen turned back to the board, picking up a marker. "Let's list every reason this feels impossible," she said. "Let's put them all on the table." One by one, students called out barriers: money, transportation, lack of experience, fear of rejection. Karen wrote each one carefully, giving weight to their honesty. The board filled with struggles, but also with recognition. No one was alone in their fear. For the first time, even Jocks leaned forward, his arms no longer crossed. "Now," Karen continued, "let's imagine solutions. The class broke into groups, researching scholarships, bus routes, community mentors. The room that had been tense moments ago now hummed with activity. Karen caught Jacques glancing at a handout Maya had slid across his desk. He tucked it into his notebook, pretending not to care, but Karen saw the shift. When the bell rang, the students filed out. Jacques lingered near the door, his face unreadable. "Whatever," he muttered, as if dismissing the day. But then, almost under his breath, he added, "My name's actually Jackson." Karen met his eyes, steady and kind. "Good to meet you, Jackson. See you tomorrow." As he left, Karen exhaled, her hands trembling slightly. She knew the battle wasn't won, but something had cracked open. It wasn't victory yet, but it was possibility. And in this work, possibility was everything. That evening, Karen joined the volunteers in a circle at the community center, coffee cups in hand. Their tired faces carried the glow of quiet commitment. Daniel, the volunteer she had met at orientation, greeted her warmly. "How's your group?" he asked. Karen smiled faintly. "Growing," she said, and pushing back. One by one, volunteers shared their stories. Some spoke of small victories, others of frustrations that still stung. A veteran volunteer leaned forward, his voice steady. "Remember, change doesn't happen overnight. It sticks when they choose it for themselves." Karen felt his words settle inside her, loosening the knot of pressure she carried. They brainstormed ways to support struggling students. Karen suggested pairing them in a buddy system to encourage attendance. Daniel offered to mentor one of the newer boys. The group's energy wove together like threads forming a net, each volunteer holding a corner of responsibility. None of them alone. For the first time, Karen admitted her fear of not belonging. The room grew quiet, then filled with nods. "You're here," said one woman, her eyes kind. "That's enough to belong." Karen's throat tightened as relief washed over her. She realized she wasn't just returning to service, she was returning to community. Before leaving, Karen checked her phone and found a short email. It was from a former student she barely remembered. "Got the apprenticeship. Tell the next class it's possible." Tears filled her eyes as she read the words again and again. It was proof, alive and undeniable, that what they did mattered. Stepping outside, the cold air wrapped around her. Chicago's skyline glowed with 1,000 restless lights. Her grief was still there, quieter now, but beside it pulsed something stronger. Purpose. It wasn't an erasure of pain, but a transformation of it into movement. As she walked home, Karen felt different. The city that once suffocated her, now breathed with her. For the first time in years, she was not just surviving, she was contributing again. And deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning of her rebirth. Karen sat at her kitchen table late one night, papers scattered across the surface. She wasn't preparing lesson plans this time. She was filling out a college application. It had been decades since she was a student, but something inside her stirred with the same excitement she saw in her class. If they could chase dreams, why couldn't she? The idea had been growing quietly with every session. Watching Maya's courage, Jackson's gradual opening, and the determination of the other students made Karen realize something. She had told them over and over, it's never too late to start again. Now, it was her turn to live by her own words. Submitting the application felt like stepping into unknown territory. Fear whispered that she was too old, too far removed, too broken. But hope spoke louder, reminding her that beginnings were not defined by age. Karen closed her laptop and whispered softly into the silence, "I'm ready." It was a promise to herself. The next day in class, she didn't tell them. Instead, she taught with a renewed fire, weaving stories of her own past into the lessons. The students leaned forward, sensing the authenticity in her words. For Karen, each smile, each nod of understanding, confirmed she was no longer drifting. She was alive, engaged, part of the flow again. Maya noticed the difference. "You look lighter," she whispered after class, shy but observant. Karen chuckled, touched by the girl's insight. "Maybe I am," she admitted. The exchange felt sacred, as if the student had momentarily become the teacher. Reflecting truth back at her. That evening, Karen paused at her window, the city stretching out before her. Chicago was still restless, noisy, unforgiving, but she no longer saw it as hostile. Instead, she saw possibility in every light, in every stranger passing below. The city hadn't changed, she had. For the first time in years, Karen allowed herself to dream, not just of survival, not just of purpose, but of joy. She knew challenges lay ahead, but they no longer scared her. A new version of herself was awakening, one that believed in tomorrow. The program reached a critical point as the semester advanced. Some students flourished, while others faltered under pressure. Attendance slipped for 2, and whispers of dropping out hung in the air. Karen's heart ached, remembering the cost of giving up. She refused to let them disappear quietly into the city's shadows. She organized extra sessions, small gatherings over coffee where the students could share struggles outside the classroom. At first, only a few came, reluctant and guarded. But as stories spilled out about family burdens, financial stress, fear of rejection, the weight in the room became communal. Karen listened more than she spoke, her presence steady. For Maya, the challenge was believing her quiet voice mattered in a loud world. For Jackson, it was fighting the narrative that he would always fail. Each student carried a private storm, but in Karen's presence, those storms found shelter. She reminded them daily, "You are stronger than you think." It wasn't easy. Some nights Karen went home exhausted, tears blurring her vision as she wondered if she was truly making a difference. Yet every time she considered stepping back, she remembered her mother's quiet resilience. She whispered to herself, "If they can fight for their lives, I can fight for their futures." The students began leaning on one another in unexpected ways. They created study groups, shared bus routes, and even pooled money for lunches. The once scattered class was knitting itself into something larger, stronger, unshakable. Karen realized they were not just learning skills, they were learning community. One afternoon, Maya slipped a note into Karen's hand. It read simply, "Thank you for believing in me when I couldn't." Karen pressed it to her chest, tears stinging her eyes. She understood that her purpose wasn't to solve everything. It was to stand beside them until they believed they could. That night, Karen fell asleep not with grief but with pride. Her students were fighting for their lives, and she was fighting alongside them. Together, they were proving that transformation wasn't just possible, it was already happening. The turning point came unexpectedly during a heated discussion. Jackson had been withdrawn all week, his jokes sharper, his walls higher. When Karen asked about his resume draft, he exploded. "Why bother? No one wants someone like me anyway." The room froze as his words echoed, raw and heavy. Karen approached him slowly, her voice calm but unwavering. "You think you're invisible, Jackson, but I see you. We all do." He turned away, shoulders tight, but she pressed on. "Fear tells you you're not enough, but fear lies." The silence stretched until Jackson finally met her eyes. To everyone's surprise, his defenses cracked. His voice broke as he admitted, "I'm scared. Every time I try, it feels like it's already over." The room shifted as other students leaned in, not with judgment but with empathy. Karen placed a gentle hand on the desk. "Then let's try together." What followed was not dramatic applause, but something quieter and deeper. Students began sharing their own fears. One by one, the air thickened with vulnerability, yet it was also freeing. The room that had once been guarded now pulsed with honesty. Karen felt her chest tighten with awe. Jackson didn't smile, but he didn't retreat either. When the session ended, he lingered, whispering, "Thanks for not giving up on me." Karen swallowed hard, her heart swelling. It wasn't victory, but it was transformation in motion. She knew these moments were the real milestones. That night, Karen walked through the city with renewed strength. The skyscrapers no longer loomed over her, they stood beside her, reminders of resilience built from steel and struggle. Chicago felt like a partner in her rebirth. She realized then that healing was not just personal, it was shared. By helping these young people face their fears, Karen was facing her own. Together, they were building futures where none seemed possible. The program's closing ceremony arrived on a crisp spring morning. Students dressed in their best, nervous energy filling the hall. Parents, volunteers, and community leaders gathered, filling the seats with anticipation. Karen stood at the side, her heart pounding with pride and disbelief. She had walked with these students through storms, and now they stood tall. One by one, the students presented their projects and resumes. Some spoke confidently, others with trembling voices, but each voice carried weight. Maya stepped to the microphone, her hands shaking, but her words clear. "I learned my voice matters, and I'll keep using it." The applause thundered through the room, and Karen felt tears roll freely. When Jackson's turn came, he hesitated, eyes darting nervously, but then he unfolded his paper and began. His voice cracked at first, but soon steadied, carrying conviction. "I thought I had no future, but this program showed me I can try, and maybe succeed." The audience rose in applause, and Jackson lowered his head, overwhelmed. Karen's chest swelled with emotion. She realized this moment wasn't just for them, it was for her too. The woman who had once been lost in silence now stood in a room alive with possibility. Her student's courage was her own reflection, proof that resilience was contagious. After the ceremony, parents and community leaders approached her with gratitude. One mother clasped Karen's hands and whispered, "You gave my son back to me." Karen's eyes blurred with tears. She thought of her mother then, wondering if somewhere, somehow, she was proud too. The volunteers gathered for one last circle, their voices full of gratitude and laughter. Karen spoke quietly, her words trembling. "I came here thinking I was too broken to help anyone, but you reminded me that giving heals the giver." The nods and smiles confirmed the truth she had lived. That night, Karen walked home under a sky bursting with stars. Chicago's streets no longer felt cold, they felt alive, as if they were walking beside her. The journey wasn't ending here, it was only beginning. Weeks later, Karen sat once again at her window, watching the city stretch endlessly beneath her. The silence of her apartment was no longer heavy, it was peaceful. The grief for her mother remained, but now it was accompanied by gratitude. That decade of caregiving had not been wasted. It had prepared her heart for this new purpose. Her phone buzzed with messages from her students. Maya had been accepted into a college program. Jackson had secured an interview at a local company. Others were working, studying, or still fighting forward. Each message was a thread tying Karen to the tapestry of lives she had touched. She was no longer alone. She looked at the acceptance letter pinned to her fridge, her own step into further education. The thought of walking into a classroom as a student again both terrified and thrilled her. But she was no longer afraid of starting over. She had lived through endings, and now she knew the beauty of beginnings. Karen began volunteering regularly, her weeks filled with meetings, mentoring, and laughter. She was no longer drifting, she was anchored in purpose. People who had once seen her as the daughter kept giver now saw her as something more. A woman reborn through service and connection. Her reflection in the mirror showed the same face, lined with years of sacrifice and sorrow, but her eyes told a new story. They shone with courage, hope, and a sense of belonging. She was no longer defined by what she had lost, but by what she was building. Karen whispered softly to her mother's memory, "I'm living, Mom, truly living." It was not a goodbye, but a continuation, carrying love forward into new spaces. She knew her mother's strength was alive within her, guiding every step. And so, Karen stepped out into the bustling streets of Chicago, the city no longer a stranger, but a companion. With each breath, she carried both past and future, grief and joy, pain and purpose. Her life had not ended at 58, had only just begun. In the silence of loss, Karen discovered the sound of life returning. She learned that healing does not mean forgetting, but transforming love into action. And she proved that beginnings have no age, no deadline, no limit, because sometimes the greatest gift we can give is to rise again, and in rising, lift others with us.